Well, actually, it started off in a Facebook post by one of the co-founders, Alicia Garza. It was after the non-indictment, or I'm sorry, the not guilty verdict, excuse me, because we did see an indictment. The non-guilty verdict in the George Zimmerman case after the murder of Trayvon Martin. And it was really just Alicia pouring out her heart via Facebook in this post and expressing what pretty much all of Black America was experiencing at that time, right? The heartache, the heartbreak, the letdown, but also addressing the unique dynamic in our community where people were like, I actually didn't expect this system to work, right? Why would we expect this system to work for us? Here we are let down again. Why aren't we used to this? And this was Alicia saying, I'll never get used to this. I'll never get used to seeing a 17-year-old kid not make it home. I'll never get used to seeing what our justice system is supposed to look like, repeatedly tell us that our lives don't matter. I'll never get used to living in this world that tells me in every way, everywhere I turn, that my life as a Black person doesn't matter. And after she got done with that post, Patrice actually turned the Black Lives Matter that she put at the end into the hashtag. So it was already this concept and this idea, right, of transforming the world in which we live to make sure that Black lives actually do matter, to plant that seed into people's minds, to reaffirm the humanity of Black folks within our community, right, and say, rise up, let's claim our power, let's claim our space. We're already free, as you said, right? Like, we're already free. Now how can we move about the world and make sure that the world affirms that as well? So taking that framework, when it kind of rose up in Ferguson after Mike Brown died, when people such as myself saw that and it really connected with us, we realized that there was something here, right? This was an idea that maybe has been verbalized time and time again, but nothing that hit, nothing that was so succinct as Black Lives Matter, nothing that people instantly got, nothing that people could really mobilize around. And after we started to mobilize around that, and it did the ride that I spoke about earlier, those 500 Black folks went home and they realized, or they already knew, that there was a Mike Brown in their town, right? So people started to mobilize. They formed Black Lives Matter chapters. Those came out of the ride to Ferguson. People went back and they organized in their communities. And a lot of these folks already had networks, right? Like, they were already involved in social activism, or whatever you want to call it. They were already involved in nonprofits or community organizations, solo activism. They were already cultural shifters and leaders. They were already people who were invested. And this just created a stronger network. And that's really kind of where Black Lives Matter is focusing right now, is creating that network, right? Making sure that the people that are going out to do this work, making sure that the Black folks that go out to do this work are sustained, making sure that we're fortified, making sure that when we go out and we do counteract this violence and we think about the world that we want to live in, that we're actually making sure that we're transforming ourselves inside and making sure that we're strong enough for that, and making sure that the violence that we incur day to day is something that we're addressing within our spaces. So we're building, you know, as Black Lives Matter, we're building a really strong network of people to make sure we're utilizing our resources, but also with a focus on building power within ourselves, right? Not allowing this current system as it exists, the current structure as it exists, to define what we see as possible, right? Really making sure that the 16 and the 15-year-olds and the 18-year-olds and the 30-year-olds, or whoever it may be, right? People that are at various stages in their leadership, making sure that they're not afraid to expand their minds, making sure that we're not afraid to envision this world where Black Lives Matter, whatever that may mean. So, you know, there's a lot of different avenues that people are taking. You've got cultural leaders. We're really mobilizing our cultural leaders, and you know, that includes like celebrities, but also, you know, just people who are out making art and making music and really encouraging that and pushing that and advocating for people to utilize art and utilize, you know, writing and just all of the different ways in which we express ourselves as social activism spaces, right? Like, if you're not furthering your cause as a Black person, if you're not furthering the idea that your life matters, then how are we really cultural shifting? We need to do that, right? Making sure that people are connected across, and I say across the nation, but Black Lives Matter work is international, right? But the chapters right now are across the nation. I think there is one in Canada. I believe, but making sure that the people that are doing this work are really connected to the folks that are doing it in every other place, not recreating the wheel. So making sure that we are looking to folks like Power and Dignity now in LA when we're talking about transforming the prison industrial complex, right? Making sure that we're looking to folks in North Carolina when we're talking about building a citizen review board with subpoena power. Making sure that we're connecting with, the Black farmers movement in Oakland when we talk about food justice. It seems really simple, but there's a lot of work that has to go into it because people have been working on so many different fronts for forever, right? But a lot of times we don't talk to each other. And that's why Black Lives Matter is so important as a network, because we can build these relationships through which all of our justice flows. And like I said, we're not recreating the wheel. And that leaves us more time to, what's that? Oh yeah, there's a new campaign, I call it the Imagine campaign. It's Imagine if Black Lives Matter, right? So there's an ask out for Black folks to imagine what the world would look like if Black Lives Matter. Like, just think about that for a second. Because we know that the world we live in right now doesn't say that. So what if it did? What does that look like? How are Black folks affected? How are Asian folks affected, right? How are brown folks affected? How are white people affected if Black lives really do matter across the board? So, there's the network building, and then there's also the connecting of all of the pieces. A lot of things that we heard early on in Ferguson were, why are you out in the streets, like you said? What do you want? What are the demands? Where's the leader? Civil disobedience is actually, not the way to go. You need to have policy. You need to be picking people up for office. You need to be running campaigns. You need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do this, right? And we realize that there are a lot of ways to attack this, and people are doing it across all of the fronts, but we have to make sure that they're working in correspondence with each other. It does no good for me to go out and have an active resistance and have an action, right? And potentially have it in front of the people that are directly responsible, but not have something else to back that up, right? Not have an ask. Not have a policy transformation, not be going back into my own community and building power that says we're not dependent on them. When they do get on board, then we can work together. But until then, here's how we're transforming our own communities, right? And that's what BLM is really focused on, is building power within our own communities, first and foremost, and doing that through a really, really strong network of people and making sure that there's a unified message. And then the other thing, once again, that I can't stress enough is making sure that the work of cultural shifting is shifting what it means to be Black in people's minds, right? So making sure that the historical definition of Black, which is, male-centered, which is heterosexist, which is cisgendered, making sure that that's shifted so that folks like myself as a queer Black woman are included, right? So folks that are Black trans and women are included because they are at the margins of the margins and dealing with some of the worst oppression. But if we don't address them, then how are we doing the work of Black Lives Matter, right? If we're not addressing the issue of the militarization and the early admittance into this prison industrial complex of our children, we're not addressing our educational system, how are we really proving that Black Lives Matter? So it's putting all of these pieces together to make sure we're formulating a cohesive message, firstly for the people that want to do this work, making it easier on ourselves, right? Because it's hard enough. But then also for the world at large, so that when we go out and we say Black Lives Matter, and people say, I want to get involved, we have something that you can directly plug into. Because this moment, this movement that we're in, we know it was spawned from a reactionary event. We know that, as we call it, the turn up in the streets, which was really just people going out to stand for justice or just stand for what their idea of justice is. We know that that's not something that's sustainable. So now, how can we take that fire and make it sustainable? And that's really the focus of it. And then I'm sorry, for the second part of it, as far as technology is huge and important, right? We're in Silicon Valley. We know where the hell. We know that we need to utilize technology and utilize it in a smart manner and utilize it in a manner that makes it work for us more so than the people that are monitoring us through it, right? So there's really a push to make sure that while we're utilizing social media in particular, we're also building, once again, power within ourselves. So how are we crafting our spaces? How are we making sure that we're not dependent on social media that wasn't created for us, really, that's not controlled by us? How are we making sure that if that were to all go down, that we're still connected, that our movement still lives? So it's hugely important, but once again, more important is to make sure that we're building power within our own community.
Ham radio operators when it really gets down to it.
I have a question for Ashley. Thank you for sharing. This is really precious and great. I'm thinking if we all agree that racism is a system of oppression, it sounds like a lot of what you're saying is that the part of the society who has been and is oppressed is making a lot of effort to change. But the other side of the equation is to change the oppressor, right? So the work of, I'm wondering if in this specific political moment with the two presidencies of Barack Obama, Eric Holder, if there was any talk about class within blackness, right? And if there are specific people that are part of a powerful sectors of society that the Black Lives Matter can refer to and sort of build alliances with in order to change the structure of power. Because oftentimes indigenous people and third world people or post-colonial people, as we say today, carry all the burden of change on themselves, while really the structural change has to be for the top 1%. So I wonder if there has been discussion about that. I'd love to hear from that perspective.
And actually, you met with the president.
I did meet with the president as a result of, like I said, the turnup, right? So after 115 days of active resistance in Ferguson, myself and 7 other activists from around the country got called in to meet with the president. If you remember, he rolled out 3 policing-focused initiatives in December. Those were the day of our meeting. And some of them were of our ask, right? So there was the initiative for more police body cameras that came out on August 9th immediately that said that if Darren Wilson was wearing a vest cam, there would be no question if Mike Brown's hands were up, right? There would be no question of whether or not we would receive justice. But as we've seen time and time again, in the cases of John Crawford, in the cases of Tamir Rice, in the case of, Walter Scott recently, in the case of, I'm sorry, the brother's name eludes me, but we just saw today a non-indictment come down in the case of a young man who was mentally ill and whose mother called the police, and he came to the door with a screwdriver and was shot dead within 20 seconds. And the grand jury today just decided that there was not enough evidence, right? Another non-indictment. Sorry. So yeah, like thinking about all of those things and realizing that the solutions that were given to us aren't really solutions, they're just steps, right? Like body cameras isn't enough. They also introduced a federal oversight of 1033, which is important. We've been calling out for that, as I spoke about earlier. It's a program that's ran unchecked since 1997. The tear gas, the Humvees, all of the extreme high-powered weaponry that you saw utilized in Ferguson was funneled through this program. And there's no federal oversight of it until December, where they just introduced it, right? So that's a step. But we also realized that they're never going to take these steps unless we have that agitation. It was 115 days, and these are baby steps, right? So we have to keep that pressure on. We have to continue to make the people who would have us comfortable in our oppression uncomfortable, right? Like we have to continue to do direct actions such as Black Brunch. We have to continue to learn from the legacy of folks like, MLK in particular. People always want to say this is the new civil rights movement, right? Like this is the same fight we've been fighting. This is the exact same fight. And since it is the exact same fight, we can look back and we can pick up those useful tools that the people that came before us utilized. Martin Luther King knew that direct action and confrontation and really putting these images out that showed the world what it was like to be a Black American weren't enough by themselves, right? Like he went into other spaces, he went into the political offices, but he knew they had to work in correspondence with each other. So there are folks that are going out and speaking to, the CBC, the Congressional Black Caucus. There are people that are going out and speaking to nonprofits that supposedly have Black life at their center, right? There are people that are going out and, like I said, such as myself, speaking to the president and speaking to the people in political power especially, But we have to realize that it has to be a multifaceted approach. It's not enough to go in there and to beg for our humanity, because if that were enough, we would not have to say Black Lives Matter, right? So we have to continue to do direct action. We have to continue to work with the people that are in power, while at the same time thinking about how not only to access that power as it stands, but how do we transform that power? And I know, right, like that's scary. I know that that's not what people want to hear. They want to hear, let's groom someone, and if we only have someone like Barack Obama in office, then things will be better. But once again, we know that's not true. We've had 2 terms, right? We know that's not true. We know that one person cannot transform a corrupt system. So what can? And that's the work that we're doing, is utilizing those tools that have come before us, building upon those, and challenging people to think about transforming these spaces, transforming the world, right? Because if I were complacent with the world I live in, I wouldn't do this work. So it's as much as it is on the people that have the power, as on the people who don't have the power, right? As on the oppressed people, it's on all of us to make sure that we're pushing these people collectively to create a world where Black lives actually do matter.